accessibility and UX and project management and all of the fun stuff. So that's why I work at Girls Who Code. And a fun fact about me is that I'm a yoga teacher, and today was International Self-Care Day, and I taught yoga for my colleagues on Zoom today. So that's my fun fact. Let's meet some of our panelists. So first up, we have Sasha Diamond, the Director of Web Experiences at New York Life Insurance Company. We're really happy you're here, Sasha. In her role, she utilizes marketing, web analytics, and product management knowledge to lead strategy and execution of engaging customer-facing digital experiences. And I was talking with Sasha before this event where we're gonna really dive into what that means and what she does all day. When she's not working, she loves sailing. That's awesome, and enjoys learning about neuroscience. Thank you for being here, Sasha. Next up, we have Lisa Mcgarth. Lisa is a staff user experience designer at GE. And a defining moment in Lisa's life was watching Toy Story. Everybody loves Toy Story. The first computer animated movie that she had seen it inspired the technology, it inspired the technology could be functional and creative. And she pursued paths in graphic design and computer science. Such a cool combination, Lisa. I can't wait to hear more about that. When she is not at her computer, we all live at our computers, she can be found with her nose in a book. And I'm also a huge reader, Lisa, so I would love to hear what you're reading when we get into some more introductions. And last but not least, we have Maria Garcia, a user experience designer and strategist from Athena Health. She enjoys breaking down complex problems to create simple, more usable software and customer journeys. Maria has over a decade of experience working in healthcare and consumer products. And while she has worked on everything from voice to television interfaces, healthcare enterprise software has become her passion. I mean, we all need healthcare, and software drives everything. So I can't wait to hear more about it, Maria. Thank you for being here. So for all the folks in the chat, I can see people leaving comments. I appreciate that. Feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us where you are in the country. I'm in Chicago. We've got someone in Milwaukee here. We've got folks in New York. We've got my colleague Alyssa online in New Jersey. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. But I want to turn it over to our panelists here for a little bit of an icebreaker. I would love to hear about a piece of media that you've been consuming lately that is inspiring you. So that could be music, that could be a TV show, a book, a podcast, anything you'd like. And also, while you're at it, if you could just share the name you prefer to use and your pronouns, and then we'll really get into this conversation. Maria, would you mind kicking us off with a piece of media inspiring you?
Sure. So I am Maria, she, her. I am working at Athena Health, as Emily said in the introduction. I am a user experience designer, and I'm sure we'll get to talking what exactly user experience is when we dig into this. I am not currently consuming Ted Lasso, but I'm eagerly awaiting Ted Lasso second season coming out tomorrow. So really excited about that.
I have a watch party scheduled with my friends. I'm excited too. Thank you, Maria. And I just wanted to point out, we have folks, okay, we've got London, Virginia, New Zealand, Middletown, Connecticut, Plano, Texas, California. Thank you all for being here, for spending your Thursday night with us. It's great to have you. Sasha, what are your preferred name, pronouns, and a piece of media you're loving today?
Yes, I'm Sasha Diamond. I go by she, her. And first shout out to Afifa Ali from Trinidad. My mom is from Trinidad, so I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of cousins that you may know down there of mine. So
wow, small world.
Small world. So I'd like to share actually a learning platform that I find extremely influential. It's called Mind Valley. If you haven't heard of it, it has some personal development, professional development. So if you consider yourself a lifelong learner, definitely check it out. One that actually really inspired me recently is around lofty questions. So it's a question and affirmation method where instead of saying an affirmation like, I am influential, you ask yourself a question, why am I influential? And then it kind of does a brain trick where you start doing the little things to really become truly influential. So it gave me such a sense of excitement and motivation. So just wanted to share that.
Wow, the tips and tricks are coming, and we're just doing our icebreaker. Thank you, Sasha. That's so cool. And Lisa, could you share with us a little about yourself and your media choice?
Lisa Mcgarth, she, her. I'm another user experience designer at GE Healthcare. Media is a little non-traditional outside of my work, but I really am binging on the renaissance of like Victorian aesthetics and cottagecore and dark academia, and just the escapism movement that happened from the pandemic and how we're going back in history. So that movement is just really interesting.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing. And just to clarify, I'm Emily Moss, also she, her, and my piece of media these days. I found I was never a podcast listener pre-pandemic, but now I find when I'm puttering around my house and I'm folding laundry or cooking, I've been listening to The Daily from the New York Times basically every day. And each day is sort of a compact story. And I really love it because I felt like I've become a lot more aware, especially of international news and stories that maybe I wasn't following. So if you're looking for a way to get more informed, like a little 20-30 minute podcast every day from the New York Times, The Daily, that's my tip. So one thing I noticed when I was reading and stumbling over your job descriptions, my bad, is that you all have complicated job titles. So the first thing that I want to ask you is just to tell us a little bit about what your job title means. Specifically, like, what do you do all day? And what, we heard UX, we heard strategy, we heard all these terms. So Sasha, would you kick us off? Remind us what your title is, and then what does that actually mean?
Right, and I appreciate how that question is positioned. What does it actually mean? Because the same job title can mean different things across companies, especially depending on what department you sit in. So I sit in the marketing department at New York Life Insurance Company. The title of Director of Web Experiences means that I am the lead web producer for our brand's website, NewYorkLife.com. So that means the projects I focus on are what you would see if you visited the site, whether it's the design of the site, sub-site sections built for special initiatives, or landing pages built for marketing campaigns.
Okay, thank you, Sasha. We're going to get into more of that in a moment. Maria, what is your title? What does it actually mean?
So I think my title now is User Experience Architect. We kind of switch titles somewhat regularly. And my job is a fairly unique one, I think, in terms of user experience. So user experience as a field is thinking about the usability and the general experience anyone has with any kind of interface. It could be a voice interface. It could be your standard software interface. It could even expand out towards customer experience, which I'm dabbling a little bit more in. So when you think about Apple, they're the kings of customer user experience, thinking about the whole journey that someone takes when they're using their products. So user experience is this, it's a somewhat fledgling field. It's only been around since really in its current form, probably about 25 years, 30 years. And I'd say even 25 years ago, it was not something well known. So what I do in my day-to-day job is I work, so Athena Health is a medical revenue cycle, an EHR, so electronic health record software. So what you go in, when you go see your doctor and they're typing into the system, they're typing into one of these kinds of EHR systems. And I work on the billing side of it. So if you give them their insurance, how you get paid. So I'm really looking at all of the different users that impact doctors getting reimbursed for their whatever work they're doing. So it's really thinking deeply about not just your typical, it's the Twitter user, but really, like, what is your medical biller doing in the system, and how can we make it easier for them to do their work? How can we make it easier for a doctor not to burn out on spending time trying to just get reimbursed? So I love my job, actually. I think it's really fun to think about this level of complexity.
Thanks, Maria. I think one thing, and we'll get to you in a second, Lisa, one thing I want to point out is that we think of tech as being only a specific type of company, but actually, tech underlies so many things that guide our lives, whether it's healthcare or our financial systems or the arts and the TV that we watch and the podcasts we listen to. There are engineers and UX folks and designers at every type of industry these days. So when you're thinking about what you could do in tech, that really is an endless field. Lisa, can you tell us again about your title and what that actually means?
Yeah, so I am a staff user experience designer at GE Healthcare. I'm not in the actual creation of our physical machines, but I'm actually on the digital side. And in my roles, like a staff level, I work across products. So I touch on, I'm in more in the education space for the people who use our machines. So helping them learn how to use, say, a ventilator, a CT machine, MRI machine. Training, they have to have a lot of training to know how to use the machine proficiently. So I work across that whole kind of education experience of like, how can they get aware of the training, buy the training, take the training, and ask and have questions and get support.
That's awesome. I mean, unfortunately and sadly, ventilators are something we've all been thinking about so much lately. I want to take a moment and note for folks that joined us later that at the bottom of your screen, there should be a button that says live transcript. And if you want to turn on your closed captions, we have enabled that for this event. It's something that's new to me, and I want to own that. At Girls Who Code, we're thinking about accessibility for our programs really differently and trying to learn what the best practices are there. And so captions are available at the bottom of this Zoom now. I want to talk a little bit about what accessibility in tech, that's the title of our conversation today. For us at Girls Who Code, what we're thinking about is when we have a program like this conversation online, how do we enable more people to be able to participate with the choices that we've made? So for example, if we had this event in New York City, almost all of you could not have come, right? Even having this event online in some ways is an accessibility choice. On the other hand, for somebody with different types of disabilities, having an event on a computer screen is not their ideal setup, right? And so we have to be thinking about these balances and different tools like captions to make our programs at Girls Who Code more accessible. So I would love to hear from each of you a little bit about when you're in your work, what does accessibility in tech mean at your organization or for your particular job? And maybe Lisa, you could start this one.
Sure. So I'm on the digital side. Technology for me, ours is, I would say, and where I'm at, accessibility is kind of fledgling. It's not really thought about. They have like a bias to thinking that everybody's able-bodied who operates our machines or who buys our machines. For me, when I'm doing this, my job is more about inclusion. So if you can access it, that means we're included. You could buy this product, you could use it. And so that's kind of where I go from it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Sasha, how about you? What does accessibility in tech mean at your organization or with your work?
Absolutely. With my work, as I mentioned, it's the website, consumer-facing experiences, what you may see when you come to newyorklife.com. And our team needs to be strategic in the decisions we make so that it balances the user's experience and their needs, and also meeting our business's needs, all while meeting the consumer needs. So with the user experience and our website, we need to ensure that any potential visitors coming to the site can access information in the best way that is for them. And anyone coming to the website may have a certain range of abilities or disabilities. And there's actually, with the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's guidelines that we have to follow in order to make sure that our website is accessible. I know that their guidelines are they're not laid out very clearly. So there's actually another set of guidelines, the web content accessibility guidelines that most organizations follow. And I won't get too into the details right now, but there's so many different pieces of the guidelines that we consider when we develop our web experiences. So definitely happy to dive deeper into those.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, Sasha, because I would love to think about some of the things that you consider in that work. Maria, excuse me, how about you? Does this all sound familiar or do you all think about it a little differently?
So we have kind of a tale of two cities in terms of our software, because we have patient-facing software and websites that must be accessible because it is medical, getting your health record, getting your billing, getting all of that. So we have a big emphasis on the patient-facing side. But then when you go to the user interfaces that the doctors use, that the billers use, that software was designed 15, 20 years ago when accessibility wasn't really a thing. So what the company is trying to do, what Athena Health is trying to do, is figure out how we, as we roll out new features and develop new user interfaces and UIs and experiences, how can we make those new experiences accessible? And I think that the other key that I like to think about accessibility is it really is improving how we design overall. It's not that we need to do something weird in some way that's only going to benefit someone with color blindness or someone with a hearing impairment or someone that has some sort of cognitive impairment. Doing those things and keeping those types of users in mind is actually going to benefit everyone overall. So that's been a very persuasive argument I've found as I've been arguing to have more accessibility standards in organizations. That, look, it's really important to think about tab order and how a screen reader might read this particular screen, because if a screen reader can read it, a person that doesn't need a screen reader is probably going to be able to understand and go through it more easily as well.
I love that point. We were talking in our pre-session conversation about how, for example, at Girls Who Code, we got some feedback from one of our students who doesn't have a hearing impairment, but does have ADHD. And she mentioned to us that captions on videos really help her stay focused and get the most out of her sessions. And she's been talking to her professors at school about adding captions to online lectures and finding ways, I love what you said, Maria, it benefits everybody, right? One innovation that you might remember is like on a sidewalk where it goes down into the street, they add those little bumps, right? For people who have sight impairments to know where the edge of the sidewalk is. But how many of us have been walking on our phones, not paying any attention, and then you feel that bump and you're like, aha, I should not walk into traffic, right? These things, they benefit all of us. I want to stay on screen readers for a moment, Maria, because that's just a really interesting concept. Do you mind explaining what a screen reader is for folks if they're not familiar? And if there's any other examples of kind of common accessibility tools that we might not be familiar with? And Sasha and Lisa, you can add on in a moment as well. I'd love to just talk about some of those things that these days are kind of considered the baseline.
Sure. So a screen reader, you can, I haven't actually used a screen reader in a while to test out any of the UIs that I've developed, but a screen reader will take the code, the HTML code, and look at the tags on images and read the information that's on the image out, so that any user who is using a screen reader will be able to understand the structure of the page based off of how the screen reader reads that information. So it's super important to think about how you're laying out the elements on that page, even if you think about the design of the visual versus the design of just the code. And that is a really important difference, because you don't have to have those be one-to-one in the sense of, you can have styling that makes it render a certain way, but then you can have the code be very clean and have a screen reader be able to read through it in a way that is very smooth. Sometimes you go through a screen reader and listen to how it reads a screen, and it is the most excruciatingly painful experience you might ever imagine, because it's saying a bunch of links that have bizarre numbering, and it's awful. So so that's one of those tests that you can do as you're developing front-end UIs, to just listen to it.
I mean, that's amazing. I've noticed the trend in a good way on Instagram, where people write image descriptions, so that if someone's using a screen reader on Instagram and they're not able to see the image, they still get a description of what was there. And that's just like a very basic best practice. I don't know if you see the chat here. Payal just mentioned that Netflix posted 2 versions of a trailer today, one with an audio description with a voiceover describing the action if there's no dialogue. That is such a cool innovation. Thank you for sharing that. Sasha, I would love to hear from you if there's any tools that you've seen becoming more common or that you've noticed that have really sort of changed the game around accessibility in tech.
Yeah, I'd actually love to first add on to what Maria was saying with the screen readers, where there's some of the guidelines around making sure you add alt tags for the images to describe what is in the image. So when you look at the best practices for writing those descriptions, you have to describe what you're seeing, not what it's for. So if you have a screen reader that's reading through the content and then it pauses on an image, you don't want it to say marketing campaign image 1. You want it to say family enjoying picnic at the park. So that's definitely one of those screen readers. And as far as other devices, assistive devices, I'm not too familiar with voice to text, but I know that there's also, those who have limited mobility, being able to navigate websites with their voice. Again, not too familiar with those, but I think that's super cool that they're able to do that. And another one that I've been realizing is becoming more popular is being able to translate websites and apps into Braille. So I know the Google Play Store has a device that is able to connect to it and translate. So that is super innovative and exciting.
Wow, that's so cool. I hadn't even heard about that. My colleague Alyssa, who's managing our Zoom today, just posted in the chat, and she said, I love the text-to-speak tool for copy editing. We've noticed at Girls Who Code that, if you write an essay or a blurb, and then you have somebody read it out to you, including your computer, you notice copy editing mistakes and typos. And that's like an incredible tool, Maria, to your earlier point, that benefits anybody, but is designed to support people who need that specific skill. Lisa, what have you noticed in terms of new trends or innovations in this space?
So a lot of different things. The captions, if you actually, there's in movies, you can have a different caption tracks, one that has the audio like birds chirping, or it's just the dialogue, and you can get that on the web, and the Braille thing. Another one is you got to think of, there's tools for low vision users. They actually use a screen magnifier where they start to blow up parts of the screen. So you need to have a very structured content. Trying to think, I love the voice tech, like on the phones are getting so much better with their accessibility things. Just to be transparent, I am hearing impaired. You can feel free to ask me about that. I have been for almost half my life now. I wear hearing aids. So when I use my phone, I have different settings that I can use that can connect to my hearing aids. There are, if you have vision problems, you can bump up the size of your text. You can increase the contrast ratio. You can have the text to voice. So there's different ways of even using a touch device to make it accessible.
So cool. And thank you for sharing a little bit about your personal story, Lisa. I do encourage folks to ask questions, not just of Lisa, but of all of our panelists. You can put them in the chat. And if we have time in a few minutes, we would love to hear your questions. One trick that I read about recently, sometimes when you check a box, it turns green, like if you're filling out a form online, and it shows you that you've completed that section because it's green. But if you're colorblind, maybe you don't see the change. And so one of the design best practices is not only does it turn green, a checkbox also appears, right? You're thinking about the iconography and the way that these images convey information. So I know we have two UX designers on the line here. I would love if we have students that are like really passionate about this kind of work and they want to learn more about accessibility in tech. Maybe they want to work in this field. What have you noticed? Like, what should they be studying in college, or what kinds of industries should they consider working in? Is UX the right field? Are there other areas to study? What would you give advice to students that are interested in studying? Maria, maybe start us off with this one.
So the basic guidelines are the web accessibility guidelines that are published by the government, the WCAG, whatever, I forget version they're on at this point. So just even starting by looking at what those guidelines are is where I'd recommend getting your baseline. They're extremely, to Sasha's point, they're a little confusing and very thorough, but there's lots of great websites and blogs and sources out there that go pretty deep into accessibility. I think that it's an interesting field to go into right now. just because I do think that we're starting to build out more user interface frameworks that have accessibility built into them. And so if you're interested in building components that will be used potentially by a lot of different applications, that's a really interesting way to get involved, is to find a place that's creating pattern libraries and working in that kind of space.
Awesome. Lisa, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so I think there's books, if you want to go into human factors, or even psychology has a big play in human computer interaction. I would also, if you're really interested in this, I'd go seek out those people or those communities that are disability communities. I mean, pick out, like, there's probably groups, there is the deaf community, they have these communities, like there's the blind community, the deaf community. If you want to talk to them to learn more about it, just expose yourself, because I think the more you have exposure to that, the more you start to care about it, and you might get more passionate about it and figure out, what do these people, what do the struggles do they face?
I think that's a great point as well. Rather than assuming what folks need, talking to actual users, which, as we know, is one of the basic components of user experience for anybody, right? We don't just take a guess, we actually talk to our users. By the way, Alyssa has posted a couple of resources that have come up in the chat, so you can grab those to look at later. We'll also put them in our follow-up email. Sasha, any other thoughts for folks that are curious about studying this or making a career in this field?
Absolutely. I think what Maria mentioned around getting familiar with those guidelines is a good first step. And then, as Lisa mentioned, good next step is to actually speak to those who may be in those communities. And then even challenging the status quo of what those guidelines are. Even looking at them today, I feel like there's so much more that we can address, that if you want to be innovative and think of new ideas, there's so many opportunities to explore. Something else that I recently read is that Microsoft has launched games that are completely controlled by eye movement. So a lot of the guidelines don't address mobility, maybe mobility around being able to navigate sites using your keyboard and tabbing, but imagine if you can control every screen with your eye movement to scroll down or move to the side, whatever it may be.
I mean, we really are, I think, living kind of on the cusp right now of really incredible innovation. Those are all really good pieces of advice. And Sasha, something I love that you said was sort of challenging the status quo. This goes for all of our college students and young professionals. When you get into a new job, if you see an opportunity to improve something, a process or a product, especially to make it more accessible, I would personally say that's a pretty good way to impress someone right away. If you were to say, hey, like, I noticed that we don't have alt tags on our images, you know, could I do a project around making this more accessible for screen readers? Like, if I were hiring you as an intern or an entry-level employee, I would be very impressed by that kind of initiative. So I actually would like to take a step back for all three of you to think about your early careers a little bit, and without doing a whole resume of how you got to where you are. But I would love to hear a little bit about maybe where you started and some advice that you wish you had known about the industry that you work in. Because I could tell you that I thought, like, okay, there are doctors and teachers and lawyers and dentists, and I'm not sure what else is out there until I got out there. And so I would just love to sort of hear a little bit about that moment in your own career. Sasha, would you start this one?
Definitely. And I love telling this story because it's a lot of self-realization moments. So starting way back when I was in my teens, probably, I was always the kid who was on the web. Funny, I'm now working with the web, but I was, modifying my AOL profile with, if you guys know what AOL is, with the HTML code and MySpace and customizing it. I had no idea I was working with code at that time. I was just Googling things and making my own special profiles. So after that, going to college, I actually interned at Madison Square Garden and continued an additional 5 years of my career there in the traditional marketing space. In that space, I was able to dabble a little bit in web analytics and realized that I really loved to combining my subjective and objective mind and being able to make objective decisions using data. So I actually switched my career path, took a huge risk, and learned a new skill. And from there, I started working a little bit more with web experiences, analyzing them and being able to offer insights to enhance the user experience. And then a next step from that, I really loved the insights that I was sharing and everything I was observing, that I wanted to be part of that journey in making the changes. So I transitioned into this web experience, web producer role. So it's all come full circle from customizing my AOL profile to now customizing our brand's website.
I love that.
If I could actually add, through that journey, I was always focused on job titles. What do I want to do? What's that job title I want? What I wish I would have known is that focus on what you actually want to do, because as I mentioned earlier, not all job titles are the same. A job title can be different things at a company, and you may not be looking for it because you don't know that the role description is exactly what you want.
That's such good advice. And I think, if you're interviewing, asking a question of like, what is my day-to-day going to be in this role? Is this going to be a lot of spreadsheets? Is this going to be a lot of copywriting? Am I going to be in meetings all day? Is this project-based? Trying to get a handle on that. And then the self-knowledge to know what will actually bring you satisfaction is really good advice. Lisa, what advice, and tell us a little bit about your early career trajectory.
All right. So I want to say if I was inspired by Toy Story. I actually wanted to be a computer animator. Couldn't find a 4-degree animation school in Minnesota. My parents wouldn't pay for out of state. So I went to computer science and graphic design. And so for most of the college career, I thought I was going to be a front-end web developer, content creator, graphic wise there. And then I got exposed through an internship with other students with disabilities. And I figured out, no, I really want to help people with technology. And so then I went back to college and I heard about this usability testing. And I was like, oh, I want to get in there. So I went to grad school and I got a master's in human computer interaction. And that was more that started the path down. How do I help people? How do we make sure that the things that we create are actually solving a problem and somebody's really facing? And so then I went on to my career and I was a software engineer coming out for my first job, but then I got to transition that career in that company and I actually built up. They never had a UX designer before and I actually got them to switch me over to be a UX designer.
That's a really great story. Could you, this is gonna indulge me here, would you recommend a master's program in human computer interaction, or under what circumstances would you recommend that kind of program?
Yeah, so that kind of program is if you really want to get in depth. There are a lot of UX boot camps, but a lot of them, they don't give you a lot of depth to the field and what is available. I would think in a degree, if you want to be really taken really seriously, having having that master's coming out, like, yeah, you're a user experience designer, you got a master's, you know what you're talking about. So I had like instant credibility. You don't have to though. So if you're already in the field and you're in your career and you want to make a switch, then you don't have to get a master's. You can start transitioning, take those boot camps, take those classes, and you can still transition over.
I appreciate that advice because everyone's situation is different, right? Sometimes people can't afford to go to grad school. They need a quicker transition or they need something part-time, but there is a difference, right? Between a boot camp that helps you kind of get your foot in the door versus the in-depth kind of program you're talking about. And, I think credentials in some ways can be really problematic. And in other places, I think, especially for women, sometimes having a credential can help you make the case for yourself. And it shouldn't have to be that way, to be super clear. But sometimes you need that kind of backup. Thank you so much for sharing some of that. Maria, I saw you like nodding along with that conversation. I would love to hear about your early career and some advice you might offer.
Sure, there's a lot of overlap here. So my earliest sort of ambitions going into college was that I wanted to study the brain in some way. I was very interested in biology and I thought I was going to go and work in a lab and cure cancer or something. That was what I wanted to do as a high schooler. I got to college, I worked in the lab and it was miserable. I hated it. But the degree program I was in was a joint program between, it was called Mind, Brain, Behavior. So it was a joint degree program with psychology, biology, philosophy, and computer science.
Amazing.
And so it sort of melded all these different areas that I was really interested in. And I graduated, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I was like, maybe I should be an architect. So I went and I worked at a landscape architecture firm. And then I said, no, that's not right either. And then I went to work for a professor who was in the psychology area. And that wasn't really what I wanted to do either. But he let me know about a master's program in human computer interaction, because that's the program he'd come out of. And so he kind of sold me on it. It took me a few years to really commit to it. But then I went and I got my master's degree, and it was an amazing experience. The program that I was in was a very practical program. I think that's another sort of factor you need to take into account when you're looking at a master's program in something that's related to user experience. There's super deeply technically like human factors playing, and I need to understand how to optimize for war, kind of human factors. And then there's a very practical program like the one I went to, which is actually teaching you how to run a usability study, how to do certain methods, teaching you statistics and business savvy that you need for user experience. So after that long and winding path to figuring out that UX was a good place for me, I've been in UX now for almost 12 years, and haven't really looked back.
I noticed, if you see in the chat, Asma wrote, this sounds a lot like my experience with college, haha. I think you're not alone, right? This, I think each of your stories, did you notice this? You all started out doing something different and wound up here. I mean, we had landscape architecture, we had computer science, software development, we had marketing, right? It's just fascinating. And I think one thread I want to pull out for our listeners is that you are not committed to the first thing that you do, right? My first job was in advertising. I worked on the Ziploc account. And now I work at Girls Who Code, right? Like there's a journey here, there's a path, you're not locked in. And what I also love about your story, Maria, is that like at each point you were learning like, oh, I don't really like this, so I'm going to shift this direction. Okay, I don't really like that as much. And you find your way. And it's just, you know, I think when you are 20 or 21 and you're considering your options, it can be really overwhelming. And you think, well, the first job I take is going to be what I do for the next 40 years. And that is not the case. So thank you all for sharing those journeys. I would like to put one last question to you. And this is just in your first job. And I'm going to start this round. I would like to hear a piece of advice for making the most of your first job, whatever that field turns out to be, whether it's landscape architecture or marketing or something totally different. And I'll start. So my piece of advice for folks when you're in your first job is to raise your hand and volunteer for things. And we talked about one example already where if you see something that is not as accessible as it could be, you could do the research and figure out how to make it better. And that could be something you could raise your hand for. But I think it goes more beyond that. You could say, you know, can I sit in on that meeting and just listen in, right? And invite yourself to meetings. And sometimes your boss will say, no, that one's above your pay grade. And that's fine. But sometimes you'll get to listen. And then afterwards you can ask questions and you can learn. Can I work on that project? Is there a way that I can help? And starting to put yourself forward will give you opportunities that you wouldn't get if you sort of sat back on your heels. So that's my advice in your first couple of jobs. Let's start with Sasha. Advice for your first job.
Sure. I'll add on to yours and say that part of my internships at Madison Square Garden, which I will consider my first job, is that I was able to hop around from department to department over the course of 3 semesters, and they all worked together. So what really made me a great employee once I was hired is that I understood how they all worked together. So I was a great partner within all of our projects. I understood what they needed. I understood how to speak to them. And that's the same even when you start exploring how to speak to wider departments. How does tech speak to marketing? How does marketing speak to business, etc.? So definitely agree with that one. The other piece that I would say is, as you're mentioning, raise your hand, but take the projects that scare you. If you're not scared, you're not going to learn. And then you'll look back at, as you grow and say, wow, that I could actually do that in my sleep now.
That's some good advice for everyone at every stage in their career, frankly, because otherwise you get stuck in a rut. And, you know, I'm going to file that one away for myself. Thank you, Sasha. Lisa.
So I started as a software developer. That's not where I wanted to be. So I would say, keep your eyes out when your first job, look around, always be aware of the opportunities that exist for you. And if you work hard and if you bring up a sound case of why you want to explore something and how it benefits that business, they're likely to say, yeah, go ahead and try it. And we want to support you on that. At least that's been my experience.
I love that, especially at large companies, which is where a lot of our students start, because there are great, rotational programs and associate programs. If you're looking left and right and you're like, oh, that's interesting, I want to try that, pitch it. I mean, maybe not on your second day, give it a shot first, right? But that's such good advice. Man, this has been such an amazing conversation. I want to thank you all. It is a busy Thursday in the middle of July. I'm amazed we have over 50 young women here with us today. That's fantastic, listening to this conversation. For the listeners, we are going to send a follow-up email to you tomorrow, and we're going to include some of these links, the web standard guidelines, the accessibility guidelines, some of the recommendations. Sasha, I don't remember the name of the website you posted at the very beginning, but we're going to include that too. Ted Lasso for everybody who wants to watch some great TV. We're going to put all these recommendations together. And we hope that you got something out of this experience, whether it's starting to think more critically about accessibility in our lives and our technology, or just more broadly thinking about career paths and how winding and creative they can ultimately be. I got a lot out of it. I filed some advice away. So I'm going to ask Alyssa to put up a survey for you. For our listeners, you can just grab your phone and take a quick screenshot or a quick photo, and it will take you to our survey. It's like a 1 minute, real quick. We would love to hear how this conversation was for you. This is an ongoing series. If you have ideas for our next conversation, we would love to hear them. And I just want to plug for all our listeners that we do have a big event coming up in September. It's the Gross Code Hiring Summit. So we will have 26 corporate partners. Some of the companies represented here will be there as well, hiring internships and entry-level jobs. So I'd love you to mark your calendar for September 15th, and you will be on our email lists. That's probably how you got here tonight, and you'll hear a lot more about that. But we would love to connect you to some of these companies. I mean, think of the women that you met tonight, and think of all the people that you can meet like that. Oh, Ava said, is there a different way to get the survey? It'll be in the email for you tomorrow. And thank you, Ava, for your dedication to filling out our survey. I appreciate it. And I'm glad that you're listening in on your phone. That's an accessibility thing unto itself, that one doesn't need a laptop to participate in these kinds of things. So on that note, thank you, everybody. We're going to send you back out. Yes, it was a great conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Payal. Yeah, we were so glad that you're here. Panelists, I'm going to email you tomorrow. I really value your time. Thank you for sharing so much with us tonight.
Thank you.
They said your passionate stories, amazing advice. Thank you a bunch. Thank you. Look at all those notes. Isn't that nice? All right, everybody, have a good night. Thank you.